Welcome to the Bros Talking Soccer podcast. My name is Dave Knittel, and it is day 3 of the 2019 World Cup, June 9th. We are recording live on YouTube. Hello, everybody joining me live on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, hello in the future, or hello from the past, I guess is the right way to say it. This is a podcast where three brothers generally talk about what's happening in American and European soccer, but we've been doing World Cup recaps, and I'm the oldest Knittel brother. My name is Dave. Christian, the middle Knittel, is still at a wedding. Matthew, little Knittel, is off doing other things. Tomorrow we should have a guest, and let me say this up front. If you are watching these matches and if you follow soccer and want to jump on a podcast with me, definitely hit me up. I would love to talk to somebody else, so I'm not just talking to myself at PT Soccer Pod, or send an email bros.talking.soccer@gmail.com. We can get you added. It's super easy to do all of that. Before we get into talking about the matches today, wanted to give a quick mention. We are a part of the Big Heads Media Network. Go check out bigheadsmedia.com. There's about 40 different podcasts about all kinds of interesting, unique things on there. So go check them out. Our other partners, stadiumscene.tv. You want to check them out if you're going to a stadium in the US or Canada. They also partner with content creators to offer all different kinds of sports content. So check them out. Last quick plug for just our friends. Check out Over the Bar FB. So at Over the Bar FB. We've had them on the podcast in the past. They're putting out all kinds of World Cup content, doing interesting facts before the matches to help you get familiar with the teams. And again, someone to follow if you're following the World Cup. As I have done this in the past, let me know what you want me to do on these podcasts. If you want me to go through and cover tactical, if you want me to cover just general recap, if you want me to give more overarching thoughts. Generally what I do on these is I give my pre-match kind of thoughts, I give my first half thoughts, and then what happened in the second half. The first and second half thoughts are a mixture of kind of recapping the events that happened and also trying to provide a tactical breakdown of things that I'm seeing. But, you know, if you have other things you want me to talk about, at PT Soccer Pod is the best place to give feedback. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave that comment below. For those that want to watch on YouTube, we record immediately after the last match finishes each day. All right, all of my preamble is done at this point, and let's get to the matches. So first match of the day, this was probably the best match of the World Cup so far, and was also our first upset. Australia played Italy, and Italy prevailed 2-1 in dramatic fashion. So before the match, I was thinking Italy's debut at the World Cup after a 20-year absence. So I guess it's not a debut, but it's their first appearance at a World Cup in 20 years. I didn't know if there were going to be nerves, and that was something I was looking out for. Australia has only won their opening game one time at a previous World Cup, and so that was another thing that I was going to be watching out for. I was excited to see Sam Kerr play. She's the striker for Australia, and very hyped up. And I was going to be watching her movements and all of that, and we'll get to that in some of my thoughts later on. And then Australia was going to be in a 4-5-1, 4-3-3 formation, whereas Italy was lining up in a 4-3-3. First half kicks off. Australia tried to do that FIFA move that everybody tries to do when you play FIFA, where you kick it and you just dribble straight at the defense, and they just tried to show a ton of aggressiveness right from the start. They were getting the ball back into play quickly on restarts, throw-ins, all of that. They were trying to put pressure on Italy, which I thought was smart because, again, it's their first appearance at a World Cup in 20 years. You've been there before. You want to put the pressure on them, and I thought that was a smart strategy from Australia. And Italy did well and showed a bit of resolve, not panicking on that front. Italy, a lot of the teams that we've seen so far that come out with a 4-3-3 shape, 4-3-3. Yeah, I said that right. Don't actually defend in that 4-3-3 shape. Italy actually was, and they were kind of in this medium block, so they weren't pressed too high, but they were kind of in that medium block. And then after the goal happens and all of that, they sort of adjusted into more of a 4-4-2 and started to press a little bit higher. But defensively, that is what Italy was doing. They were also compressing things into the middle and forcing Australia out wide. So they were very comfortable with just keeping their three forwards and their three center midfielders just tucked in and just saying, Australia, you're not going to play through us. We're going to send you out wide, and we back ourselves to win the crosses and things like that, or the 1v1 battles out wide. And so that was something that I was seeing defensively from Italy. 9th minute comes along. Italy gets the goal, but it is ultimately ruled offside. It was a great run by Bonancia, who was Italy's best player on the day. It was also a fantastic through ball by Gigliano. I'm going to apologize right now for pronunciations, and I'm not going to apologize again, so just bear with me on the pronunciations. And so Gigliano played it through about 4 or 5 players, and she had a number of passes that were excellent throughout the match. Kerr hit an early cross around the 14th minute, and I thought that Australia offensively, sorry, I'm reading my notes, so sometimes I need to refresh my memory. I've been up since 3:30 in the morning because I'm out here on the West Coast, and so I apologize if I'm a little slow. A different type of apology. No more apologies, Dave. All right, keep it going. Again, Italy was directing the play out wide, and Australia was becoming way too predictable. And so they were kind of meandering and eventually crossing the ball in. And I thought what Kerr did in the 14th minute is she got wide and she had a very early cross, and it sort of, Italy wasn't back defensively, and it created a little bit more danger. And nothing really amounted from this. Nothing really happened from this. I guess I'll say it that way. But I thought that Australia needed to do more things that were just like unbalancing and unsettling the Italy defense, because I thought they were too predictable. I thought both teams were pretty physical. It was very competitive early. Wasn't dirty. In the second half, we saw Italy get a little bit more dirtier on their tackles, but first half I thought it was good, competitive play, physical, a lot of grabbing, a lot of pushing, a lot of little fouls. 21st minute, this is when Gamma takes Kerr down. And so there's a cross that's swung in. Kerr has Gamma on her backside and is able to kind of turn her. And Gamma puts her hands on Kerr. Kerr absolutely goes down soft and very easily in this. And it's kind of a soft penalty. But at the end of the day, a forward is going to go down if you put your hands on them. And then ultimately it's up to the referee to call it. And so for me, I'm okay with this, with this being a penalty. And for that reason, Kerr then steps up and converts. So that was in the 22nd minute is when she actually scores. Right before this, I actually noted that Kerr has these subtle movements at center forward to just create space for herself. And she did this much better in the first half than the second half. But it kind of happened on the goal where she had this subtle movement and unbalanced Gamma. She grabbed her and Kerr went down, and then it resulted in the penalty. The penalty was saved very well. It was hit low to the goalkeeper's right. Giuliani had a very nice save as the Italian goalkeeper, but unfortunately bounced right back to Kerr, and she was able to tap it in. I thought that Italy made an interesting tactical decision in the first half. Gamma man-marked Kerr. Wherever she went on the pitch, she followed, and the other center back was kind of free to float. Let me pull up the lineup so I get the other center back's name correct. The other center back was Linari. So Linari was free to float, and Gamma more or less followed Kerr all over the pitch, and Kerr more or less stayed pretty central. But I thought that was interesting to see, and they went away from that in the second half, and I think that helped Italy. But wanted to highlight that. I thought offensively, Carpenter was very involved for Australia. Carpenter was the right back for Australia, specifically on the ball. She was heavily involved, but twice within the first 30 minutes, and we saw it a couple other times throughout the rest of the match, she was very slow to step up. I don't think she is a natural right back. I think the broadcast was saying either way, she was good offensively, but defensively, she was a little bit suspect, specifically with lagging behind her other defenders and keeping Italy onside, which was an interesting move because Italy was called off something like 9 or 10 times in the match. But even still, I thought that Carpenter may have been a liability because she was lagging behind the whole time. And so that's something that Australia needs to get corrected as they move forward. Italy really didn't have much going offensively in the first half. I thought Bonancia was the only one really generating any sort of half chances for them. And I also thought that Italy was a bit too conservative once they got on the ball and taking players into the final third. Specifically, they weren't really making runs. I thought that they had one or two players supporting the player on the ball, and the rest of the players were kind of waiting in the box when they were in their attacking third. Now, I thought they were a little bit better when the ball was in the middle third of the pitch and their midfielders could play the ball through. And I thought Bonancia made a couple good runs. And I thought that, I guess Mauro really wasn't that involved. Girelli wasn't overly involved either. So it was more or less just Bonancia making the runs from a bit deeper. But I thought Italy could have been better in the attacking third on that front. Halftime comes, subs for Italy. Bartoli comes on for Gali at right center midfield. So in the right center midfielder. And then I thought that Williams was really solid for Australia in net up until kind of the last kick of the game. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But she was being, she was coming out. She was punching the ball on corners. She was playing with her feet. She looked very comfortable and very composed as the goalkeeper. And that was a comforting sign for Australia. Giuliani on the other side of the pitch for Italy was also really good throughout the match. I thought both keepers had a really good game. It was unfortunate that Williams kind of makes an error late in the match and probably isn't going to be remembered too fondly for that. I thought that I mentioned this earlier, but Gigliano she was just really good at hitting those balls. So she was a center midfielder for Italy and hitting those balls over the top, hitting those through balls for Italian runners. And she did that very well throughout the match. Second half, Gama stopped man marking Kerr. And I think what that did is it freed up Italy from a defensive perspective that, okay, they could be a little bit more stable in knowing where the players were, and they didn't have to account for, all right, Gama's here now, and so we don't need two players there. And I thought that was a good move for Italy. 56th minute, this is where Italy gets their goal. It is just a poor, sloppy giveaway from Australia. Polkinghorne takes just a massive touch. I thought Australia had that line of overconfidence, and so they were playing and they were a little bit too passive and slow coming out of the back, and Polkinghorne just takes a way too big of a touch. Bonancia pounces on it and is able to just, cut inside / past the sliding defender, who I assume would have been Kennedy, and then just tucks it into the side as she's falling. Excellent slotted finish, and Bonancia gets her goal, deservedly so. 58th minute, Mauro comes off. Sabatino comes on at right wing. Like I mentioned kind of earlier, I can't really recall Mauro's name being called much throughout the match. I didn't think she was very involved at all. 61st minute, we have Logarzo off, and Davana comes on for Australia at left wing. Davana was very active, very much a nuisance, and just had an impact on the match. Unfortunately, didn't get any goals or anything like that, but definitely was a little bit more involved than Logarzo. Italy also, they started to press higher and put more pressure on the ball. More even match. Oh, yes. Okay. So Australia dominated in the first half. Sorry, I got to recap my notes here. It was more even in the second half versus the first half, because Australia really dominated the first, and Italy came out and pressed higher. So like I mentioned earlier, Italy was sitting kind of pretty far back off of Australia in the first half, allowing them to possess, allowing them to get comfortable, allowing them to build up a little bit of momentum as they came into Italy's attack defending half. Italy changed that in the second half, and it really resulted in them having a more even game, and that was really beneficial for them. 68th minute, that's where we have the VAR review of the possible penalty. I'm okay with the no call. It was a deflection on a corner, and it hits kind of close to the defender's body, and ultimately they didn't call a penalty here. I think that this was the Italian defender. I actually don't even remember which player it was, so apologies here. I probably should have noted that, but I'm in agreement. No penalty, whatever it was. I can't really recall. I thought that the VAR reviews were very long in this match. They noted it on the broadcast, and I was thinking the same thing. The offside call on Bonancia in the first half took a very long time. The second half review for the handball, I get that they want to get the calls right, but both of them I thought were relatively clear, and even if they were close, I thought that it still took too long, and it should have been faster. Gorey then comes on for Rosso for Australia in the 69th minute at center midfield. Carpenter was not nearly as involved in the second half for Australia. She was very impactful in the first half, not so much in the second, specifically offensively. Girelli moved she kind of slid back. So when the Mauro sub happened in the 58th minute, Girelli kind of slid back in the formation. Mauro kind of went up top with Bonancia, and Girelli had a little bit more freedom to kind of move around, where she was more or less the focal center point in the first half. And so I don't think she had that much of an impact on the game, but that was something that, I noticed and something to keep an eye out for. Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me here on YouTube. Wanted to say a quick hello there. 77th minute, Bergamaschi comes off and Gian Cinti comes on. Now, Gian Cinti Bergamaschi was the left back, but Gian Cinti came on as a kind of right midfielder. And so Italy kind of went for it. They were pushing numbers forward, and it was an attacking sub to make. 81st minute, Sabatino scores, but it was offside. And this was, again, Carpenter being slow to step out. She was kind of bailed out that Sabatino was a step offside, but Carpenter was probably 2 steps behind her fellow defenders, and it was something that Australia really needs to get fixed for future matches. I thought Italy was the stronger side from about the 65th to about the 85th minute. They were really building pressure on Australia, and then Australia were just lackadaisical. They lacked urgency, and they really switched it on from the 85th till almost the last kick of the game. But again, it was Yeah, Australia, for a side that was favored, for a side that you expected more from, I did not love that they were kind of really on the back foot throughout that time period in the second half. 83rd minute, Australia makes a sub. Yallop comes off and Kellen Knight comes on at center midfielder. Kerr was not nearly as involved in the second half for Australia until really the 85th minute is when I noted that she finally started to get more involved. I thought that the switch from man marking her from Gamma man marking her to allowing her to roam more free, but have other defenders be aware of her worked, because ultimately Australia wasn't able to get Kerr the ball very much in the second half. I thought that Australia players, it was a sign of desperation where they were diving quite a bit in the box. I thought that they were looking to go to ground way too easily. Kerr was guilty of this. A couple other players were guilty of this, where specifically in the second half, it felt like they weren't getting chances. And so when in doubt, there was a little bit of contact. They were going to ground and looking at the referee. So not something that you want to see. Italy was offsides too often. They had 8 by the 90th minute. I noted that. 92nd minute, there was a foul called on Gamma. She had a shoulder-to-shoulder play with, I think it was Devani, and I thought Gamma was just strong. It was good shoulder-to-shoulder play, and I didn't agree with the foul call. And Australia had a really dangerous set piece. Giuliani did very well to punch the ball on 2 separate occasions, and ultimately, the ball was cleared. Down kind of the other end a few minutes later, and Gian Cinti wins a foul in a 1v2 situation. Again, I think that this was a bit soft, but because of the call in the 92nd minute, I was kind of okay with this foul being called on Giancinti. Again, it was kind of soft, but, Australia had the soft penalty, and I was fine with this foul being awarded. Ball is swung in, and Bonanzera scores. Header, Sam Kerr is kind of tracking her, but Williams, the goalkeeper for Australia, just gets caught in no man's land. She's wandering out. If you're a goalkeeper, you got to come and claim the ball, or you got to stay on your line. And so she's caught out kind of in her 6-yard box away from the net. Bonanzera doesn't even have to jump, and Polkinghorn can't clear it off the line. In Italy, dramatic fashion, 95th minute, gets a goal. I was up at 3:30 in the morning to watch this game. No regrets whatsoever. It was a fantastic match, and I was bouncing with energy. Australia just too little too late. They were too casual and no urgency. Those were, I think, my last notes from this game. Yes, let us know your thoughts at BT Soccer Pod on Twitter. Jeff has a question before we move on to the next match. Thank you, Jeff. Have you seen any team yet who will be able to develop and compete with France? So, not quite yet, but as I mentioned in the podcast yesterday, World Cups in general are tournaments that are built off of momentum. And so the fact that you have a fantastic opening match doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a fantastic match every single match of the World Cup. And so as dominating as France was, there are teams here who can give them a run for their money. I mean, Germany is definitely one. I'm still very high on Spain. France and the United States are on a collision course in the quarterfinals. We haven't seen the U.S. play yet. So I would, I'm certainly not counting them out. No one has had quite as dominating a performance as France has. Although, you could argue Norway looked really good, and they're certainly not going to be a pushover in their group. But having said that, I thought that as good as France looked, South Korea really allowed them to do that. South Korea, we saw in some of these other matches, China versus Germany, the underdog came out and pressed more. I mean, even Brazil versus Jamaica, we'll talk about that. Jamaica pressed more. And some of the other matches where the underdog was facing a favorite, they didn't sit back nearly as much. South Africa versus Spain, I thought that they did a better job of not allowing France to dominate the match. South Korea did allow France to dominate the match. And so I thought that played a big role in that scoreline. As dominating and as impressive as France looked, it's just the first match, and I'm not willing to crown them champions just yet. But that is an excellent question. Thank you for that. Getting to the second match, Brazil versus Jamaica. Brazil just dominated. 3-0. Just impressive performance all around for Brazil. So before the match, I noted that I was worried about how Brazil was going to look without Marta. She's one of their best players. She is their best player ever. She had a thigh injury. She was being rested for this match. Brazil had lost 9 consecutive matches coming into this. It had been almost a calendar year since they last won a match. So obviously that's going to play on their minds. I didn't know how they were going to respond to that. From a Jamaica perspective, I wasn't sure what style they were going to be coming with, kind of like I was just talking about with Jeff's question there. I didn't know if they were going to be timid and sit back the way that South Korea did against France, or I didn't know if they were going to press a little bit more the way China did. And so I was interested to watch that all develop. Congratulations to Jamaica being the first Caribbean nation at the Women's World Cup. So shout out to them. They were coming out in a 4-3-3 or 4-5-1 formation. It really was more of a 4-3-3. I know the broadcast thought it might be more of a 4-5-1, but I thought Jamaica defended somewhat naively in kind of that 4-3-3. And we'll talk about that as we go along here. Last thing pre-match was they were hyping up Khadija Shaw. So Bunny Shaw is what she went by. She had 19 goals in 12 matches in World Cup qualifying. And so they were hyping her up. So I was keeping my eye out for her, and she did not disappoint whatsoever. And we'll talk about her in the match as it went on. First half, Brazil started kind of the same way that Australia did, where they had a tap and they just kind of flooded numbers forward. And it's just a sign of aggressiveness and just, hey, we're here. I know you're making your debut at the World Cup, but this is kind of where the big girls play, and they just kind of came right after them and was a sign that, okay, Jamaica, this is going to be a battle. I thought that Jamaica was defending kind of deep with lots of numbers other than Bunny Shaw. She was staying high. And then as the match kind of wore on, that was what was happening initially. I thought that Matthews and Carter kind of stopped tracking back. Specifically, Matthews kind of stopped tracking back quite as much. And, Jamaica was leaving gaps. Let's put it that way. 6th minute, Jamaica had a surprise press that caught Brazil off guard. So Brazil kind of dominated through the early stages, but then Jamaica just all of a sudden just had this press, and it almost didn't even look coordinated. It almost just looked like 5 or 6 Jamaican players were just all of a sudden rushing, and it really caught Brazil off guard, and they were almost able to steal a back pass. And the goalkeeper, Barbara, who had a superb match and was really on point throughout the match, did very well to get the ball out. Jamaica, again, I thought that they were more aggressive than what I expected. I didn't know if they were going to sit back and try to be more of an absorbing counter. Thought that they pressed more and didn't allow Brazil to get comfortable. I thought that, the press wasn't always, like I was talking about, coordinated. It wasn't always executed well, and they didn't track runners very well. But again, they came out, and props to them for showing some aggressiveness. 8th minute, there's a through ball to Dabinia, and Schneider comes out with a huge 1v1 save. She had a number of these miraculous saves throughout the match. She's 19 years old, goalkeeper for Jamaica, and played superb. Even before that, I forgot to note the minute, but she had a punch on a cross earlier that was really big. And so she had a superb performance for a goalkeeper that gave up 3 goals. She still did very well. Brazil, shortly after that 1v1 save, gets a goal. Came in the 15th minute. It's a cross in by Andressa, the outside midfielder for Brazil, to Cristiane. And she was the replacement for Marta. And so she had not been in the best run of form, and again was kind of a last minute addition because Marta was a relatively late scratch. I know they scratched her yesterday, but Cristiane stepped up in a huge way. So the cross comes in from Andressa, and Cristiane really gets a powerful header on this. Schneider had no chance, directs it to the far post. And again, really impressive header for how much power was on that. And so fantastic goal. I thought that Matthews, who I mentioned earlier for Jamaica, looked good offensively, but was not tracking back enough defensively. 24th minute, Carter and Matthews swapped flanks. They did this a little bit later. I think it was the 35th minute or so. They flipped back. Yeah, they flipped back for a short amount of time before they ended the match, where they, I think, originally flipped. And so, but they flipped a couple of times just to kind of create a different dynamic, but neither of them could get much going. I thought that Matthews was probably the more influential player for Jamaica offensively, but nothing really resulted of it. By far, Bunny Shaw was Jamaica's best player. 25th minute, Schneider has another fantastic one-on-one save on Dabinia again. And right before this, Barbara had a fantastic claim where she came out, she caught the ball, and I think on a corner. And this was the second time she had done this. And so I thought that she just played really well. Again, goalkeepers in this match too played very well. And so I wanted to shout her out. 27th minute, Schneider has another save on a cross, and she was just standing on her head for the match. Formiga, the Brazilian center midfielder who is 41 years old, this is her 7th World Cup. So first off, I wanted to congratulate her. That is an incredible accomplishment. Second of all, she played pretty damn well in the center of the park, just defensive midfielder, doing the dirty work, being physical. I thought that she had a fantastic match. So I wanted to shout her out. She did well for Brazil. 30th minute, Bunny Shaw has an excellent shot from the corner of the 18. She didn't have very many opportunities, but even the half chances that she got, she more or less created them for herself, and she was so good. Barbara had a very nice save on this shot, but Shaw was so incredible as a center forward. She was a complete package in the way that she could hold the ball up with her back to goal. She had so much pace and strength to get around defenders. She was combining relatively well with her other players. And so overall, I was incredibly impressed by Bunny Shaw. I also thought that, well, I guess I'll say it at halftime. So then Jamaica, I thought that they were really struggling to track runners, any sort of, they were okay in a defensive shape. When you were looking at Jamaica and their defensive shape, it was relatively okay, but any sort of subtle or even bigger movements by Brazilian players, it looked like the Jamaican players maybe weren't as well drilled or just weren't tracking runners effectively. And Brazil was just having a lot of success with, just little kind of simple movements. And that was something that they needed to do better on throughout the match. 36th minute, Barbara has her kind of one shaky moment in the match, and she spilled a cross. So a cross came in from Jamaica. Barbara tries to claim it, and kind of as she's claiming it, she kind of falls, and the ball bounces off the ground as it's in her hands. And then Bunny Shaw pounces, and Barbara has a fantastic recovery here to just make herself big and block Bunny Shaw's shot, which looked to be going in. And so, again, Bunny Shaw, just fantastic center forward play, just pouncing on stuff, just half chances. Her performance was incredible for someone who lost 3-0. 37th minute, this is where they had the handball call. It was a tough one. Swaby has it close through her body, and again, the theme of the day was handball calls, and it's rather unfortunate that this was called, but Schneider steps up in a great way again here and saves the penalty kick low to her right. I believe it was Debinha again. No, it was Andresa. I can't remember who hit the penalty. Hold up, let me get that up real quick just so we can make sure to get the facts right. Yeah, Andresa hits the penalty, and Schneider just with a fantastic save, incredible performance from the 19-year-old. And then it's halftime. So this was the most shots in a half of any match up until that point. Brazil had 9 shots. Jamaica had 8. They each had 3 on target. And so, again, the broadcast was being, I thought, relatively harsh on Jamaica for a nation that's ranked in the 50s, lowest ranked nation at this World Cup, making their debut. They're clearly not on the same talent level as Brazil, who I think is still right around the top 10 in world ranking. And I thought that they played okay enough. Yes, they weren't great. I'm not trying to say that, but it's just having a bit of perspective. And for what Jamaica was dealing with, I thought that was something very, very much to be proud of, their first half performance. So I wanted to give them props. Second half, not quite as much, and things kind of fell off the rails, but first half, they did very well. Second half starts. I noted at this point, Plummer, the center back and captain for Jamaica, who I believe is only 21 years old, had a couple of driving runs from center back where she dribbled the ball out of the back and beat a couple of players. And then, her touch let her down or she made the wrong decision. But that was something that she was doing really well at, kind of relieving a little bit of pressure because Brazil obviously dominated the possession stats, and they ultimately finished with 62% possession. But the moments where Plummer could relieve a little bit of that pressure was good for Jamaica. It was unfortunate that she couldn't then make the right pass and really sort of build the pressure on Brazil. Brazil was too often and too easily getting the ball through the middle of the park. I mentioned this earlier. Just little movements were able to find space for them in the center of the pitch. From a Jamaica tracking runners perspective. Shortly into the second half, Brazil gets their second goal. This came in the 50th minute. Debinha had a driving run, and she touched it out wide to Andresa, who was the player that crossed earlier for Cristiane. And then Andresa has a fantastic ball. And so this pass is one of those, probably one of the most dangerous crosses you can hit, where it's low and driven along the 6-yard box, right kind of in the 6-yard box, where it's tough for the goalkeeper to come out and get it. You have center backs and defenders running back towards their own net. They're worried about scoring an own goal. They're worried about their momentum taking the ball backwards. And so they're afraid to touch it. And so ultimately, I think it's Plummer decides not to touch the ball. And also, Schneider can't get a hand to it, the Jamaican goalkeeper, and the ball slides all the way through the 6-yard box. Christiane's on the back post. She gets a touch on it, and it goes right into the goal, slightly, maybe a foot over the line before Plummer gets it out. And, the Hawkeye system rules a goal, and it looked like a goal from the broadcast too. I mean, I said, well, that's a goal. Even before that happened. And so it was a great goal by Brazil, and somewhat unfortunate luck that it wasn't cleared off the line from a Jamaican perspective. 61st minute, Jamaica had a short corner, and Carter was able to roll her marker and lofted it to the back post, but Swaby can't put that on target. That was one of Jamaica's best chances in the second half. This is the ball. It's kind of a tight angle, but she really needed to do better. If you're the underdog, you really have to take your half chances, and Swaby had an opportunity there to put it on target, and unfortunately wasn't able to. 62nd minute, Matthews, the Jamaican winger, is brought off, and then Brown comes in. I think it's Jody Brown. She is the 17-year-old, still in high school student who came on, and Matthews started well, but she really started to fade. And once Brown came on, she didn't have, the biggest impacts from my perspective, but I wanted to note that sub. 64th minute, this is where Christiane gets the free kick in off the crossbar. So she was the one that won the free kick. This was a bit soft for me, and Christiane is dribbling through the middle of the park, and yeah, she's around a lot of Jamaican players, but I think she takes a heavy touch and isn't going to get to the ball, and she kind of, throws her hands up and falls over. That a lot of players end up doing that, and she won the free kick, but I thought that was a bit soft and didn't think there actually was a foul there. But then she thunderbolts the free kick onto the same side as Schneider was supposed to be covering. So for as fantastic of a performance as Schneider had, you can fault her ever so slightly for this one, because if the free kick's coming at the goalkeeper's side, you would hope that they're able to save it. But this is one of those, it goes off the underside of the crossbar, just over the line. And, you can have a little bit of sympathy for Schneider and for Jamaica. But, at that point, Brazil's up 3-0, and the match sort of peters out from an intensity perspective. The rest of the game, I'll still run through it, but this is where I had been up for a number of hours at that point and started to fade with my enthusiasm levels. 65th minute, Brazil brings on a double sub. Beatriz comes out, and Jay-Z, which is an awesome name, especially because it's spelled Geyse, and it's pronounced Jay-Z, which I love. And she came on as striker, and Christiane came out immediately after she scored that goal. Ludmila came on at striker. So Brazil brought off their two strikers at that point. 72nd minute, Asher comes on for Solon at center midfield for Jamaica. Yeah, this game momentum kind of really started to take off. 76th minute, Kathleen came off, and Diane came on at center back for Brazil. This may have been injury related. They didn't touch on this too much, but Kathleen looked to be maybe in a little bit of discomfort, and so that's something to keep an eye on in the future. 77th minute, there's some great combo play and build up by Brazil with Jay-Z. She hit a low, hard shot, and another excellent save by Schneider. Again, wanted to give her props. 79th minute, Cameron came on, and Carter came off for Jamaica at left wing. Dabinia was very involved throughout the match. She had a pretty good performance for Brazil. Ultimately wasn't able to get a goal through fantastic play by Schneider, but she was very influential and had a fantastic game. Brown had a couple of nice runs through midfield. This was the Brown that was a center midfielder for Jamaica. I think her name was Brown. Let me pull up the lineup. Bear with me 1 second. No, was it Brown? It was. Oh, who was it? It was 14. No, there was no 14. There was a defender or a midfielder for Jamaica that had a couple of nice runs, and now I feel like a jerk because I thought I had her name, but it definitely wasn't Brown because it wasn't Jody Brown. But there was a center midfielder for Jamaica that I thought had a couple of really nice, powerful runs through the middle of the pitch. And so I wanted to shout her out, but I've done a terrible job of doing that because I don't have her name listed. Maybe it was Cameron. Yeah. So my apologies there. Brazil, fantastic start to the tournament for a club or for a nation that was coming in somewhat on spotty form, or really just very poor form, not even spotty, and historically powerful nation that you weren't sure how they were going to do with this World Cup. Excellent start, and so they got to be feeling pretty good. My apologies. I'm recording this by myself. I need to take a sip of water. Okay, final match of the day. We had England facing Scotland, and it finished 2-1, 2-1 to England. Let me make sure I write that down because otherwise I might forget. So before the match, I was looking at England's 4-3-3, seeing how that would match up against Scotland's 4-2-3-1 formation. I was keeping an eye on Fran Kirby, who was getting a lot of props pre-match for England, and then Erin Cuthbert for Scotland, the center forward, 20-year-old, I believe plays for Chelsea, and she was a dynamite out there and really isolated for Scotland. But that was what I was looking for pre-match. I was going to keep an eye on those two players specifically. And so Scotland starts off and they're pressing pretty high and aggressive off of England turnovers. But when the English kind of had a bit of possession, they were sinking back a little bit more and letting England kind of possess, and then really starting to put pressure once England got towards the halfway line. England, they were passing it out of the back, and regardless of what Scotland was doing, they were, not playing a direct style. They were passing through the midfield, passing through the wings, and combining with defenders and doing a really good job at breaking the press through passing. I thought the game was pretty frenetic and open early on. I thought both teams kind of had some chances and the game was getting a little bit stretched. And you saw England actually try to slow the pace of the game down, try to calm it down. And then kind of once that happened, they started to get a foothold in the game. And then shortly after that, we'll talk about them getting their first goal. But the England outside backs, they pushed very high in possession, and they weren't. I think the exact opposite was happening for Scotland, where Scotland were not committing nearly enough numbers forward. And, I'll touch on it maybe a little bit later. But I noted it right here. But just it looked like Cuthbert, Little, and Emsley had the ability and the right to get forward. And then it looked like almost nobody else was allowed to get forward. There was no defenders anywhere near the attacking third for most of the game for Scotland. And even the midfielders were sinking back. And so Scotland was just at numerical disadvantages. Even when they had some opportunities to get some women forward into the box, they didn't. And it was Cuthbert up there against 1-on-5 a lot of times. And, I thought Scotland could have done better and just taken a few more calculated risks, right? In soccer, especially after they go down in the 12th minute, which we'll note here, I thought they could have taken a couple more calculated risks. But 12th minute, VAR has a review on the Kirby cross. So Kirby hits a cross and it hits Doherty, I think shortly before this. Kirby half-heartedly appeals for a handball and nobody else really notes it. The broadcast doesn't even mention it. The ball comes the other way. And I think England gathers possession, and then the referee stops, and there's a little bit of confusion because you don't even necessarily know what's happening. And looking at the replay, Kirby hits the cross and Doherty's arm is outstretched. And so this is one of those where I think it'll be very helpful when the handball rule is clarified, but Doherty's arm is outstretched and it clearly blocks the flight of the ball. Now, Kirby is 2 yards away from her and she doesn't have time to react. And also her hand is in a somewhat natural position, because if you're a standing human being or even a running or you're trying to block a shot, naturally you need to use your arms to balance your body. So it's really kind of tough, especially on replay. It looks a lot worse, but at the end of the day, this hits a handball and it blocked a dangerous cross in the box. And so I'm okay with this handball call, as rough as that was from a Scotland perspective. But Paris, by the time everything gets sorted out, 14th minute is when she takes the penalty and she puts it right in the upper 90, emphatic, just steps up, hits it. The goalkeeper dives the right way, Alexander, but Paris just has too much pace, too much placement. Fantastic penalty for her. I thought that she was fantastic throughout the match, specifically in the first half. She had a couple chances in the second, but Paris was probably the standout player for me, at least from an attacking perspective for England. England was pressing high when Scotland had the ball, and they were possessing very well and moving the ball all around the pitch. It wasn't like they were keying down the right side, although they did spend a lot of time with with Paris and Bronze on the right side of the park. Bronze was the right back and Paris was the right wing. They did have a lot of success kind of going down that side, but it wasn't all that side. They were cycling the ball through a lot, at least through the middle. I mean, Meade on the left side didn't have a ton of impact, but Greenwood had a couple opportunities for England as a left back. And so I thought that England just did a good job of cycling the ball and didn't kind of go to one thing over and over again. Cuthbert, I thought, was the only outlet for Scotland. And again, she was just so isolated and it had to be really tough on her. And so she battled throughout, but Scotland could have done more to relieve pressure. They just kept knocking. Whenever they would collect the ball, they would try to send it to Cuthbert, who isn't the biggest striker. And she did very well. But again, she was outnumbered 1-on-2, 1-on-3 in a lot of situations and such little support because the midfielders were getting kind of dragged back. And it was tough from a Scotland perspective for most of this match. 22nd minute, Bronze has a great cross to White, and that produced an excellent save by Alexander. I think this is where she like knees it or kicks the ball out. So she had a fantastic save there. I thought that Bronze did really well on this play where the ball was kind of bouncing. And the Scotland, the player is kind of in the vicinity as well, but Bronze has momentum. She takes the ball with her. As the ball is bouncing, she's able to collect, settle it, and cross it. Very impressive move for, a bouncing ball is incredibly tough to control in and of itself. When you're coming at relatively full speed, she did very well to do that. Referee, I thought, was letting a lot of physical play go. It wasn't a bad thing. I thought that the game didn't get out of control or anything like that. And I don't think it was quite as bad as that China-Germany game, but it was just good physical play. And I thought both teams did well to use that and not let it get out of hand. Little success for Scotland. They didn't have a ton of success in the first half or really until they made their subs in the second half. But any success that they did have came through Emsley on the right side of the pitch. 33rd minute, Kirby and Scott have a great combo play. Kirby then slipped it out to Meade, and then Alexander just has another great kick save. But this was a fantastic play by England in build-up, and great save by Alexander. Kim Little was drifting all over the place for Scotland offensively. She had license to roam, but I don't think it was effective because it was almost like her players didn't know where she was going to be, and she wasn't making the greatest support run. So it wasn't like she was drifting so that she could be an outlet for Cuthbert when she had the ball, or at least she wasn't doing it effective enough. And so that was something that she needed to clean up. 40th minute, White got her goal, and so she had a goal called back earlier, but this time it doesn't come back. England had pinned Scotland back, and so they had swung in the ball a couple of times. Scotland has these kind of half clearances that England keeps collecting, and so even though Scotland is repelling maybe some of the initial balls in, the last one happens where Scotland gets the ball, they head it, and the ball is kind of bouncing, and Kirby beats Corsi to the pitch. No, ball comes off, comes back, Scotland clears, then Greenway. Yes, Greenwood steps to the ball. So the ball is bouncing. There's a Scottish midfielder there, and Greenwood just comes through and wins the ball off of the Scottish player. And so she gets there first, and the ball is then rolling towards Kirby, who is in between Corsi and then White, who's directly behind. So Corsi has to step to Kirby. Kirby beats her to the ball, pokes it around Corsi. White does it very well to quickly turn, finish, curl it near post. And so that was an excellent goal. And on that play, it was just England not letting Scotland get out and just pushing them back. 42nd minute, England can't clear on this. And then there's a little challenges, center back. Oh, so yeah, this one is where the ball was bouncing. Little challenges the English center back on the ball bouncing. She doesn't win the ball, but because she put the pressure on, Cuthbert is able to collect the ball, and then she has an opportunity. This is similar to the Swaby chance I mentioned earlier. It's a half chance, but when you're the underdog, you get an opportunity like this, you have to at least hit the target. And she dragged her shot wide. Dragged. Yeah, she dragged her shot wide, and that was unfortunate for Scotland. That was a really good opportunity for them. At half, England 66% possession, and they were really dominating the match. Second half starts. Bright had the first thing I noted was the Bright collision with Cuthbert, and she couldn't really brace herself, and she injured either her arm and or her head, and it just looked like a rough injury. She tried to play it off for maybe a minute or so, and thankfully she was substituted. Hopefully, wish her well. McManus came on for Bright by the 55th minute. Walsh, Scott, and Kirby, the midfield three for England, were dominating. I thought that they were cycling possession very well. They were fluid. They were moving all over the pitch and controlling the play. I thought of the three, I was looking out for Kirby. I thought that Walsh and Scott were more influential and had a bigger impact on the match. And so I was impressed with their play throughout. In the 55th minute, I already mentioned the McManus sub, but also Smith came on for Doherty at left back for Scotland. And so it's interesting because Scotland makes two influential subs, really two subs. Scotland's first two subs might have been their only two subs. No, Arnaud came on later, but their first two subs in a match where they're down 2-0 were two outside backs. And so the Smith sub on for Doherty really unlocked things because Smith actually got forward. So what I was talking about earlier with Scotland not having enough numbers into the box, at least Smith had a opportunities or at least pushed the attack to a certain extent and was a little bit better for Scotland. I still think by the end of the match, Scotland was still not taking enough calculated risks with pushing numbers forward, but it was at least a little bit better once Smith came on. 70th minute, England had a corner and Scott nodded it to White, and Alexander with another fantastic save to keep Scotland in the match. Again, she was big for Scotland throughout. 71st minute, England makes a sub. They bring on Mead for Carney at left wing. Elmsley, I thought, was a little bit too predictable. So and it wasn't necessarily her fault because she didn't have the support. I was talking about support earlier. I thought that she would get the ball on the right wing and she would more or less be forced and or have to drive towards the right. She'd just drive up the right sideline towards the end line. And that was kind of her move throughout. I thought that she didn't have enough support and she was really on her own and that was her only move. But I wanted to highlight that. 75th minute, Howard, the right back, comes off and Arthur comes on. Again, second sub, you're down 2-0. You would think you're making an offensive sub, but it was more like for like defender substitution. Smith got forward. That had been missing all match. That's when I noted that. 79th minute, Scotland, not England. Scotland gets their goal and makes things very interesting. So Houghton has just Houghton has an absolutely terrible ball. I don't know what she was thinking, to be honest, because she plays it right into Evans. So Evans is standing there and she's almost surprised that the ball is played right into her. She gets the ball and then she just drives straight at the England defense. So Houghton was probably, I'll say maybe 35 yards out over kind of towards the if you think about the 18-yard box, like right at the edge of the 18, you just move that up, 15, 20 yards. That's where she was when she played the pass. And so she played the pass and then Elmsley, nope. And then, I lost. Evans intercepts it. She drives directly at the defense and is able to cut in front of the coming back, English defenders, which is fantastic, smart play to do. And she's able to poke the ball out to Emsley, who cuts in front of her defender and then takes a fortunate deflection, but Scotland's in it. It's 2-1 and very much against the run of play, but deservedly so, at least on the play right there. They get a 2-1 lead. They bring it back to 2-1. 82nd minute, Kirby is subbed out for Sandway at center midfield. Sandway was a little bit more offensive, a little bit more, what I'll say is she looked a little bit more aggressive than Kirby. Kirby was a little bit more playmaker-y and trying to, it seemed like, slip in other players, where Stanway was shooting quite a bit. 87th minute, Murray came off for Scotland and Arnott came in as a center attacking midfielder. Last couple of notes here. I thought that Scotland really just lacked urgency and energy at the end. They probably were just absolutely wiped out from chasing the match for so long, but I thought that they just, it's stoppage time. That it's a 1-goal game. You got to get the ball forward, and they didn't have numbers forward. They weren't getting the ball forward, and so that was a little bit frustrating. I also thought that Bronze, the right back for England, was being a little bit too risky and a little bit too comfortable in some of her positioning. It looked like she was pressing up and trying to get a counter on Scotland to steal the ball in a couple of different instances. Scotland didn't make her pay, but that was unnecessary risks from my perspective from Bronze for England. But England secures the victory, 2-1. Great start to them. 3 points is a great start. I don't care what the performance is. World Cup, 3 points is fantastic. Before I recap tomorrow's matches, I wanted to quickly mention that let me know feedback on this. Again, just also from a time perspective. I know I'm just talking for about an hour. Is that how long you want these podcasts? I know they're every day. I try to recap all the action, but if you don't want me to recap all the action, if you want me to just do more high level, like tactical stuff rather than specific events, let me know at BT Soccer Pod. I would greatly appreciate that. Tomorrow's matches, we only have 2, so it'll be a shorter podcast. We have Argentina taking on Japan at noon Eastern Standard Time. And then we have Canada versus Cameroon at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So first match, Argentina versus Japan. Argentina, though they've played in a number of World Cups, has not historically done very well. And Japan is one of the stronger women's national teams, historical success, 2015 runners-up. I expect Japan to handle Argentina relatively easily. Now, the other match, Canada versus Cameroon. Cameroon, I think this is their second World Cup, and Canada, similar to Japan, has had a fantastic run as a women's national team. They're one of the, I think, dark horses for this tournament, and they're interesting because I think they have a lot of young players coming up, speaking about Canada here, and then a lot of older players kind of on the tail end of their career that are still effective. And so it'll be interesting to just see who steps up and all of that. I expect Canada to get a win there, and I'm interested to see how Cameroon does and how they play against Canada, because I expect Canada to be very strong. It'll be interesting to see if Cameroon comes out and tries to play them, if they try to sit back and counter. And so that'll be something that I'm looking out for. But that is it. This has been your Day 3 recap. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review. We would greatly appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter at BTSoccerPod. Send us an email, bros.talking.soccer@gmail.com if you want to get in contact with us. We have a Slack channel. Hit us up, and we'll get you added to that. And check out our website, brostalkingsoccer.com. We have all kinds of info, all kinds of info about ourselves, all kinds of info too, but info about ourselves. And then also merchandise if you want to support us. And you can check out past episodes and check out some of our YouTube videos that we do. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And I will talk to you tomorrow, hopefully with our friend Matt, but not my brother Matt, different Matt. But we'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone. See ya.